On TV and in the movies, architect is the coolest job. Architects get to stand at easels and look like artists, and they also get to wear hard hats and look tough. Best of both worlds. I think most of us have a pretty warped sense of what it means to be an architect because of that. Easy question. How did you become an architect?
Easy question, complicated question. I came from a family of engineers, so I'm the black sheep architect. My dad was the chief engineer for the state of Delaware for a long time, and so I was always exposed to kind of. I think kids are drawn to construction anyway. It's cool, right? It's big trucks and cranes, and it's fun to watch stuff get built. And you're doing the same thing in your house with blocks and Hot Wheels cars, and so I think there's a lot of interest in that, and probably a lot of questions at an early age from most kids. And for me, because I had a dad who was an engineer, he had answers to all those questions. And what I was always interested at, and he tells me from even a really young age, was okay, Dad, I understand what you do, but who gets to decide what the building looks like? And his answer was always architects. So that was really kind of always an interest from an early age. And as I went through school, one of the things I found was that, for my older brother, he was always interested in math, formulas. Like, he could have cared less about literature or, art. And so engineering fit really well for him. But for me, I was interested in those other subjects too. And architecture was always kind of the profession that kept coming back around as this is the thing that combines art and history and literature with physics and math and science. And I liked that diversity. It appealed to me a lot. And so as I got towards college, I really set up my college curriculums that way. I actually went to school undergrad for engineering and art history at Delaware, and then grad school for architecture. And I didn't get a planning certificate, but I was sort of with a focus on planning for grad school at Maryland, and sort of designed my education process towards that goal.
The first time I really considered what it meant to be an architect was when I saw the Sidney Pollack documentary, Sketches of Frank Gehry.
One of these guys came down, and this guy came down, and this one became part of that. Then
Frank Gehry's work is famous because it's pretty extreme, and if you do ever happen to be in the neighborhood of MIT in Boston, one thing you really have to do is go stand in front of the Stata Center, which he designed. Seeing it in person is an experience. It feels like getting dropped into a glitching Pixar movie, a corrupted M4V file come to life. I've never been inside the Stata Center, but word is that it's not nearly as much fun. It's leaky and drafty and impractical, the last of which is probably the worst possible sin at MIT. Christy took me to the Stata Center. She's always been an admirer of architecture. And when we lived there, we would walk around Boston every time we had a free day, checking out buildings that she'd researched, some relatively famous, some obscure. But honestly, back then I was making lots of dumb vlogs for YouTube, and I barely looked at the buildings. I was too busy filming myself in front of them making jokes.
When you walk through the garden, you better watch your back. Better watch another video by Zach.
We are sitting here in the conference room of Market Square Architects, which is a company that you are the founder of. How did that happen? What's it like to start your own company?
Well, I should say a founder of. I have a business partner, Adam Wagner, and he's got an MBA to go with his architecture, which is awesome because he gets to put together all the spreadsheets, and I just have to look at them every once in a while, which is perfect for me. I was at another architecture office for about 13 years before we started this office, and he joined that office about 3 years before we left. Both of us had gotten to a point in our career, we were both 40 at the time, and we weren't necessarily as valued as we wanted to be at that office, and we were putting in a lot of effort, and we had helped to grow that office. At 40, you're kind of at an age where when you're putting in the time, and for me, I had young kids that needed a little bit more schedule flexibility. And I think if you're not really feeling valued or finding the path forward where you are, then you're going to make a determination to either continue to put in that effort for someone else or to do it for yourself. We had one project manager came with us. We basically started in this building. We had 3 computers and a telephone. That was around 4 years ago, and now I think we have 24 employees and an office in Austin, Texas, and we're licensed in 25 states, and seem to keep growing.
The second time I really considered what it was like to be an architect was years later, when I heard the Conor Oberst song Mema Borthwick.
pretty as a portrait. Look like Mama Borthwick on that shining brow of Taliesin.
Mama Borthwick was a translator and the somewhat illicit lover of Frank Lloyd Wright, another famous architect, maybe the most famous architect. She and Wright left their spouses to be together. That's the only reason it was illicit. That kind of thing was a big deal in 1909. Borthwick helped bring key ideas from Swedish feminists to the United States and was murdered with an axe in 1914. I know it's never right to try and summarize a person's life in one short sentence, but you have to admit, that's a pretty good one. Mama Borthwick, the song, is also really great and interesting, and doing an image search of all the Frank Lloyd Wright buildings that he names while you listen is a fun little intertextual activity.
To visit fallen water, it's a perfect house where no one lives.
But in the end, neither the song nor the documentary gave me much of a sense of what it was really like to be an architect. A normal career architect in 2020 who wasn't named Frank and didn't design a Guggenheim building as Gary and Lloyd Wright each did. Is that a rule? Do you have to be named Frank to design a Guggenheim building? I'm kind of seriously asking. As we've established, I don't know that much about architecture.
Architecture, we already talked a little bit about the fact that it's both art and science. What's the mix? Like, what's the ratio? Is it 50-50? Is it 60-40?
I think
it's changed by the day.
It does change by the day. I think it's different for different people. A lot of people say architects are the least paid professionals, but the highest paid artists. You know, I think a lot of what appeals to people who go into architecture is that it is varied, that your day-to-day is not always the same. I don't necessarily know that that's true in every office, but I think for our office, some offices, they like people to get really efficient at a task. In our office, we like people to be really well-rounded and stay on projects throughout the project. But I think a lot of people go into architecture because they like the variety. As much as I would like to say that, you know, I just got to sit in a chair and color all day, which is really like what I want to do. I just want to look at art history books for architecture and then design things. I would say probably that's a very limited portion of what I do. Maybe it's 10%. But I think in each phase of the project, from listening to a client and hearing what their goals are, to coming up with a concept for that, to putting together permit drawings, going through approval processes, and then actually getting it built. Really, I think what we try to do on a day-to-day basis is help people make value decisions. And what I mean by that is, what is your project goal? And then these are the options you have. These are the costs associated with it. What meets your budget or not. Make decisions that support that project goal that you told us about in the beginning.
These last couple of months at home, we've watched a couple of architecture-adjacent shows on Netflix. As parents of young kids, we've had a lot less binge-watching time on average than the rest of our peer group, but we still managed to make it all the way through The World's Most Extraordinary Homes on Netflix, which I wholeheartedly endorse. It's just two British people, an architect and an actress, wandering around unusual and expensive houses all over the world. They are enthusiastic and only ever gently critical, and Piers Taylor, the architect, he will often sit down in front of the fancy house with a notepad and illustrate various principles of architecture.
This house has such a simple idea because the idea is one single, simple circle. And how this architect has made it usable is to turn it into a square. What they've done is add in 4 straight walls across the plan. And what these square walls do is, of course, allow you to place things like beds and kitchens, etc., etc. But I think the best thing, of course, is that you never quite know whether you're inside or outside, or whether you're part of this huge bit of wilderness, or whether you're still inside this protected inner circle.
Thinking about the way that light interacts with the windows and structures of a house, thinking about the way a building can integrate with or act in opposition to the landscape, it's very edifying. I think everybody can develop an appreciation for the principles of architecture because we all interact with spaces all the time. Okay, lately most of us just interact with the one. I won't pretend that doesn't have something to do with it. I've spent a lot of time lately thinking about my own house, what I love about it, what I worry about, and what I might be able to do someday with the space.
When you talk to people, they have a goal in mind, but how much do people understand what they really need from a place, whether that's a place to live or
person
a place
to person.
work? Yeah.
It's person to person. And on the commercial side, there are sort of two different types of clients. There are folks that have a lot of facilities or develop, and they do a lot of projects, and so they're very familiar with the process. They do it a bunch. There are other clients who come in who maybe they have their own expanding business and they've decided to add on to their building or build something ground up. And they usually don't have the same amount of experience, but it's a little bit less personal because it's a business space. And so there's usually an education process there, but it's a little bit more about business goals rather than, it's a little dispassionate, I would say. On residential projects, there are people that have worked with architects and design professionals and gone through construction before, and there are people that have not. There are people who are willing to trust and let go and take recommendations, and there are other folks for whom that process, because it's their house, it's extraordinarily personal. And so the range can be from one extreme to the other. But on residential, I think it probably more typically there's an education process that occurs in terms of how the process works and how you get from point A to point B. And that's different for every person and every budget, and again, whether they've been through the process or not. It always surprises people, costs, just in terms of the process, whether it's for us or for an engineer or for anybody. And I think a lot of times we really try to map out exactly the amount of hours the tasks take and explain to people that. But I think for a lot of people who haven't been through the process before and don't understand, you really have to show them, this is the amount of hours. And once they see that, it can make sense. But I think that's hard for people.
I'm sort of in the middle of another serious British architecture show rabbit hole right now. This one's called Grand Designs, and it's also on Netflix, but it's just 2 random seasons. I already burned through those, and then I bought 2 more from Apple, but that seems to be all that's available stateside. It's very frustrating, because the show's been on the air for like 20 years.
There are those lovers of history who see its artifacts, historical novels, fine old buildings, as a playground for the imagination. A place infused with heritage, coloured by nostalgia.
Grand Designs is much more process-oriented than World's Most Extraordinary Homes, though the end result homes are often, if not extraordinary, then certainly above ordinary. It follows the construction of various houses around the UK, and episodes will sometimes span years. Women building houses get pregnant and have babies in the course of an episode. It can be a little heady for an era that's already distorting our perception of time. Grand Designs is hosted by this guy, Kevin MacLeod. He travels around and meets with couples planning ambitious projects, and he harasses and doubts them the entire time. Every cost-cutting measure they're considering, he tells them will never work. Every avant-garde design choice, he tells them it'll clash with the environment. He is a classic contrarian, except unlike most contrarians, he is happy to be wrong in the end. That's the central irony of the show, the overcoming of odds and the doubts of the dour host. Of course, sometimes he isn't wrong. And there's also something very darkly satisfying about that, about watching an hour-long show about a failed construction endeavor. Plus, you want the contrarian to win every once in a while. One of my best friends is a classic contrarian. He's always playing the devil's advocate. He's always doubting our most ambitious plans. He's not unsupportive, really. It's just that he's supportive in a way that sometimes takes some time to see. Recently, this friend of mine shocked all of us by announcing that he had joined the army, which, after I had some time to consider, it struck me as a pretty classic contrarian move, just a terribly timed one. To be honest, I don't really know why I'm bringing it up right now. I guess I sort of wandered here while I was talking because it's been on my mind. I feel terrible about it. I feel torn up about it. I don't think I'd surprise anybody by saying that I am deeply opposed to the way that our country is lurching toward fascism, and to join the military at a time when it seems equally likely you'll be deployed to either Tehran or Seattle strikes me as, unconscionable, morally horrific. I'm trying to be supportive, if only because I'm so scared for him and there's really nothing I can do about it now. I think I'm just going to be supportive in a way that will maybe take some time to see.
What's your favorite part of the process?
For me, it's design. And I guess that's, I touched on that a little bit before. I mean, I think for for people in our office, for instance, we want everybody to have a varied experience and become a well-rounded architect so they can stay on projects through the life of the project. But within that, every architect, I think, develops things that they're really good at and things that they're less good at, and things that they're really interested in and things that they're less interested in. And you hope those two things align. What you're good at to also be what you're interested in, because then you'll get to do it more. But, for instance, with me, I've always been most interested in the design side, especially the concept design, and especially elevations. To me, that's where the real artistry of architecture lives. It's in the elevations, and I think in the building sections.
Tell me, what is elevations?
Elevation is sort of a straight-on look at the outside wall of a building. Mm-hmm. And a building section is kind of, if you can imagine slicing a cake, and the building is the cake, it's slicing through and looking at it again horizontally so that you see the layers of the floors and what heights rooms are. To me, that's where the artistry of design is. I think often in our profession and for general public, I think they get fixated on the building plan, which is sort of looking down from above at each floor. It's kind of the traditional, what people know as blueprints, right? But to me, I kind of, there's more artistry in the other components. Plans to me are very diagrammatic.
Anyway, this is Rob Harbeson, the architect that I'm talking to. I probably should have said that earlier. And Rob is the total opposite of a contrarian. Rob is the phrase yes and in human form. Rob is involved in so many causes and is so knowledgeable about so much, I probably could have put him on the podcast and just shouted random topics at him. And, as Rob has already explained, there's some merit in having a lot of interest simply to serve you in your career as an architect. But as we talked, a higher order sense of all of this started to emerge for me. It was still just a conversation about architecture, but I started to see Rob not just as a regular career architect, but as an embodiment of community and of the incremental way that progress is really made in real spaces, on real streets, in real communities. And for what it's worth, I also started to see contrarianism as something much worse than a gimmick for hosting a TV show or a trick to start arguments at parties. I think maybe this is the intro of the episode. Can we do that this late? Welcome to the last podcast. I'm your host, Zach Little. This interview with Rob Harbeson was recorded in very early 2020. I'm pretty sure it's going to be called Here I Dreamt I Was an Architect, but more broadly, it's about grand design. And it's also very clearly about some other issues that I'm still processing in my personal life, but they all are.
Early in my career, I think the code book was a scary thing that was going to tell you why you weren't allowed to do what you wanted to. And the more that I've spent time in it, I think the code book is a tool that what I've learned is you can kind of do whatever you want. It's just what gymnastics do you want to go to satisfy the building code. Mm-hmm. And so once you kind of learn how to use all those tools, then it's just problem solving, and that is usually kind of fun. I read an article not too long ago. I think it was in the New York Times, and it was basically about the number of, like in romantic comedies, everybody's always an architect, and they were listing out the reasons why that architecture is sort of, Hollywood has landed on that as like the preferred profession, because it's sort of, there's this aura of like, oh, you're intelligent and sophisticated and artistic, and you can travel the world. And, this is because of that. There's this perception that architects, well, we're all rich. All we do is color all the time, and we're artists first and everything else after. And, I don't think that's really what the profession is, architecture. But the common thread through the whole thing, I think it's creative problem solving every step of the way. It's how do I accomplish X?
I think maybe the key to happiness or satisfaction in doing anything creative is recognizing that that's mostly what you're doing. Like, I think once you reach the point that, like, to get some joy out of the creative problem solving part. If you don't, then like that's bad, because that's mostly what you're going to be doing, no matter what your discipline, basically.
No, I think that's true, and I think the other part of it is you want to be providing value. And so, I mean, one of the reasons that architecture is so rewarding is because most of the people that you're providing that service for, they may be frustrated and frustrating along the way, but when they get to the end product, you have this thing that started as a drawing that has now become this real three-dimensional object out in the world that you can go occupy as space. Mm-hmm. And as sort of the artist side, I don't think it's any different than a sculptor or a painter seeing the finished thing that started as an idea. It's very rewarding. And on the other side of it, people ask me why I'm an architect or what I like about being an architect. And for me, it's using my creative thought process to enable people to find God. And I don't mean that necessarily religiously. I am a fairly religious guy, but that's not really what I mean. What I mean is essentially serving fellow man and enabling people to enhance their day-to-day lives in some manner through architecture. And so sometimes that might be, it might literally be, right, like I'm designing a chapel and someone finds that space so spiritual that they literally find God. But, it might be helping someone to design a family space in a residential home that's extraordinarily comfortable for every member of their family to be in, and it enables them to really enjoy that time with their family and improves that component of their life. It might be helping someone through a ridiculously arduous municipal process that they don't understand, and that is extraordinarily frustrating to them, and taking that out of their lives to give them some comfort that, one, they'll be able to go through that process successfully, and two, that they don't have to worry about that stress. And everything in between. I think one of the nice things about architecture is almost no matter what you're doing, you are solving a problem for someone. And as a result, you're improving their life through that process. And even at an urban scale, I think you see that with architects focusing on ways that we can reduce carbon and improve the environment through sustainable building practices, creating streetscapes and street architecture and buildings that interact better with the street to improve downtowns, and shaping space so that people have places to work and play and live that make sense and are healthier. I think in the 70s, our profession spent a lot of time building giant, terrible hero pancake buildings in parking lots that then ended up being sick buildings because of terrible mechanical systems and lack of ventilation. They were places that weren't social because they were all cubicle farms that nobody could interact or see each other. There weren't social spaces. There was no outside. You just drove to a place. And I think that's completely changed in the profession. I think now there's a lot better understanding and a lot more thought process about, how there's different scales of a building and how does it impact its users, literally down to kind of each workstation. How does it impact the street that it's in? How does it impact a civic space as a whole?
We're going to come back to sick buildings in a second to define it and not just observe that it would make a cool band name. But this is the first moment that I've been really compelled to jump in and comment on the COVID of it all, because that's going to change our office spaces in particular, and probably forever. My new job is a so-called open office, or, it was. Separate spaces, but not really much in the way of walls to emphasize the collaborative nature of a marketing department, I, of course, have never really worked there. I've been working from home and at various socially distanced video shoots, but there are plans to go back, and so they're putting in walls now. The walls are glass, transparent, so the emphasis on the shared space and open collaboration has become partly symbolic. And I wonder about how much of that will be the case for us, for those of us who lived both before and, let's hope, after this. How much of the public and commercial space that we interact with will contain essentially symbolic versions of the pre-pandemic world? in what ways will we try to preserve forms of face-to-face human interaction, and which ones will we let go of? Do we lose handshakes but keep bank tellers, or vice versa?
Let's get into that a little bit. First of all, sick buildings, is that a technical term?
It is a technical term.
Like a building that literally encourages illness.
I've always wondered: is it that the building itself is, is sick, or is it the people in it, or both? It's kind of all. You had buildings that were not well ventilated, and then as insulation continued to improve, it made buildings tight, and as a result, what you got was buildings that were too humid inside, that didn't have enough air changes with natural air, and so mechanical systems were supplying air, but it was becoming stale and stagnant within the building. And so that's kind of been termed as sick building syndrome. And the resolution of that is that, so building codes now have requirements for fresh air changes. And now buildings have actually, the insulation has gotten much better. They're much tighter, which is awesome because it makes them way more efficient from an energy standpoint. But you also have to bring in fresh air as part of that supply that changes out the old air. So you're constantly supplying and taking out. And so that's greatly improved interior.
So I used to have a friend whose mom was a dental hygienist, and she went to a conference one time, and he came back and he was telling me at work, he was like, oh, they just said at the conference that when you brush your teeth, you should brush your teeth like straight up and down, like sort of like pushing off your teeth, and you shouldn't do, as you were previously instructed, brushing in circles, because you're actually just like pushing germs around. And I remember thinking, like, oh my God, they're still figuring out how we're supposed to brush our teeth. But I think it's interesting that the way that these codes, you say that as knowledge has improved, right, the building codes have gotten better. As an architect, though, are you ahead of the codes in certain ways when you're designing new spaces? Certainly there's obviously a lot of like monetary restrictions and everything too. But when you're designing a new space and you're thinking about social spaces and you're thinking about energy efficiency and you're thinking about all of that stuff, who's leading who, I guess is what I'm asking. Are you leading, are you doing what the codes will be in a couple of years, or are the codes pushing you guys
in general
forward?
I think good architects try to lead forward, and that's part of the client education process. So, but I think the decisions that are made really vary project to project. And so, for instance, there's an industrial company that we've done some work for, and they have spaces that are permanent facilities that they own, where they're going to probably be there for the next 100 years, they hope, as long as their company survives. And they have other spaces that they lease, and they know that they're not going to keep that lease after 2 years. Well, the decisions that you make for one facility might be completely different than the other. So, for instance, energy efficiency or durability. Energy efficiency is awesome, but if you're a corporation, even if you really, really believe in that, yes, you'll do it at the permanent facility because you'll receive the benefit of that energy efficiency over time. If you're a company who espouses sort of the value of green infrastructure, then I think you'll make that decision. But if you have a 2-year lease space that you're not going to be in later, you're never going to spend the money to do that because it just doesn't make any sense. Mm-hmm. I think, for a lot of times for residential clients too, it's understanding the costs and the timing. So if you were to build what's called a passive house structure, which, most of those are, really, they're almost off the grid homes, or they can be off the grid homes. You may pay a substantial premium in a number of areas in your construction costs. It's definitely a non-traditional building approach. But you also will probably not have to buy a mechanical system because you can essentially heat your house with a hairdryer because the insulation's so tight. And so you really have to educate people about that. Maybe the cost difference is not so much. Even though they see this big cost over here for insulation, you have to subtract out the cost for the mechanical system and educate people on that. There are other things that you can do. So to get to a really efficient home might cost X. But to get to a net zero home, you might pay a significant premium higher than X. Mm-hmm. And so it's not, sometimes it can be parabolic. It's not necessarily linear. And so I think as architects, it's up to us to really educate people on what the choices are, what code says they have to do, but then what their options are to do beyond that and why it might be a really good idea. And sometimes it's a really good idea from a cost standpoint because there's a benefit. If you're building a house and you know that you're going to be there for 30 years and the energy payback is for whatever the upfront cost is 3 and you have the money to do it, then it's like a no-brainer. Like, go do that. For other people, they really believe strongly in the positive environmental approach. And so sometimes that cost doesn't matter to them. It's outweighed. For other people, even if they believe in it, the cost is a barrier. And what's hard, I think, is for a lot of architects are kind of trained in school to know what you believe and why, and really believe it. And I think what a lot of architects do is they have a hard time then learning and adapting what they believe, and realizing that what you believe can evolve as you learn. I try to, have people yell at me when I'm doing that, so I don't do that. But I think what's hard is you're still, in a certain sense, you're being hired. You're in a service industry, and so at the end of the day, it's not always your decision. And you can believe really passionately about anything you want to, but you're still going to get every once in a while the developer who's like, yeah, I'm just going to flip this project. I don't care. I don't want to spend any extra money on it. Do the minimum that's required. And that's the reality. So, I think to the extent that we can educate as professionals, we probably should. And I think it's important to be passionate about those things. I think that over time, we don't see the code ever becoming less.
I think if I was going to write some kind of self-help book, which, is not like out of the question at this point, it would be about how the key to accomplishing your goals is willingness to change. Change yourself, change your course of action, and sometimes even change your goal to be better fit with the circumstances in which you find yourself. When I think about the things in my life that I love and appreciate the most, they are not things that 15-year-old Zach necessarily would have wanted. Other than Christy. 15-year-old Zach definitely wanted Christy, but a house, a dog, children, a job at a bank? Not especially. And sometimes, people who knew me a long time ago will say, like, man, I was certain you were going to be on SNL one day. And, when I was 15, so was I. But jobs like that are for people who pursue a single path, never questioning their goals. All I ever do is question my goals. And I used to think that lack of certainty was my liability. It was the thing that was going to keep me from amounting to much. But I see now that it is my gift, having no allegiance to my past desires, always reevaluating what I want. It has led me down a pretty winding path, but the truth is that along the way, I have found much more creative fulfillment than a single focused path could have really ever given me. And maybe that's just me, but honestly, when other people in my life are suffering, going through breakups or having career frustrations, there is always in there, somewhere, an unwillingness to change, that's holding them back at least a little. So, I understand what Rob meant when he said that architects who come out of school dedicated to their principles don't always see how to work gradually toward their goals within the system as part of the dance, letting it move them one way or another while generally moving forward. Because, that's the other important thing to recognize here, the system is moving too.
The challenge that the code has is you're trying to provide life safety, you're trying to improve environment, you're trying to do all of those things, but at the same time, it also has to be weighed against societal costs, because every time you increase the requirements for, say, insulation on your building, you're increasing the cost to construct a home all over the country for everyone.
Yeah.
And so I think that's where, over the years, the building code has really gotten to a point where you can build a building without sprinklers, a commercial building without sprinklers, but to do it becomes more painful in every cycle of the code. There's a lot of incentive built into the code to just go ahead and sprinkle the building. And the reason is because people generally don't die in sprinkled buildings. You don't have significant loss of life in sprinkled buildings. And so the code over time has encouraged people to do, they've incentivized that. They're not going to tell you have to, because there's a cost, and they understand that, but they've incentivized that in almost every way that they can to encourage people to make that decision, because it means that for fire departments especially, that the fire department staff will be safer going into that building in an emergency. So
Yeah, so generally speaking, like over time, the the cheapskate guy who wants to just do the bare minimum, he could have done a lot more damage in the 70s than he could do now. But the other thing that's weighed against is making it easier for you, me, Joe homeowner person to build a building without it crippling us.
Right. And you look around at, there's a lot of conversation about affordable housing, for instance, and you're in a lot of downtowns in New England, you have historic districts. Well, historic districts add tremendous costs to projects typically. And the expectation that we can build something that looks like it did 200 years ago with current codes is not realistic, and current construction methods. And so how do you balance those things? And part of that is, to what degree do you allow contemporary things that are scaled and look appropriate next to traditional things versus everything has to look traditional? But yeah, codes add building costs. There's no way about it. But at the same time, there are certain standards that I think we should probably all strive to reach. And the other part of it too is I think that the industry adapts. So for instance, the codes have become more and more rigorous with insulation. But on the system side, we've become a lot more efficient with how we approach mechanical systems for heating and air conditioning. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes those trade-offs, even if there's an initial cost for, say, the first couple of years that a code is adopted, the market, I think, comes back to correct for that.
Yeah, when I think about balancing, say, like an issue like affordable housing, balancing the concerns of all the other concerns of like running a community and the environment and the building codes and everything else, it's amazing that we make any progress when you think about like how big a ship we're steering from how many different steering wheels. So it's kind of impressive. It kind of like makes you feel a lot better about the world.
It is. And it really does take an entire community's voice to vocalize a challenge, because, and part of it is, you will not find a lot of architects on things like their local planning board, because if they live and work in that town, it's a huge conflict of interest, and you'd be conflicted out of almost all of the projects that came before you. And so the people that in general are, for the most part, I think, volunteering for these boards, which is amazing in the first place to even get people to decide, I want to spend my time going to the planning board every twice a month.
Yeah.
Are people who are not necessarily, don't have the professional background always to really be educated on that. So you're relying on staff and you're relying on vocal support. And I think, as studies have shown, I think there was one from Harvard last year, a lot of the people that come out to speak publicly are just against whatever it is. I think people that are in favor of, they don't see a reason to spend their evening coming out to planning board. And so it really does take kind of vocal community to say, hey, this is a challenge that we need to all find a way to address together, because otherwise it doesn't come to the forefront as a topic.
This is the hard part I can't figure out. Is the community getting more vocal, or am I just getting more vocal? Like, I can't tell. I can't tell the difference.
Right. Are you paying attention more, or I don't know.
Yeah.
I think that they're on certain issues, especially housing. I've been vocal about housing for the almost 18 years that I've been in Portsmouth.
Yeah.
But I haven't really seen a lot of traction for it until, say, maybe the last 4 or 5 years. And even some of the decisions that have been made to support housing in the recent past in the Seacoast, I actually don't think have done much to move the needle on that. So they rezoned Portsmouth, and they added incentives for workforce housing, for instance. But at the same time that they did that, part of that zoning reduced the available density that you could get per building. So in my opinion, they actually made it more expensive to develop workforce housing than what the previous zoning had.
Yeah, I learned a little bit about density. That's important, right? Density is really important in terms of making it possible.
Yeah, I think so. Absolutely. For workforce housing, especially when you have a 1% housing vacancy. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. The more density that you can do, it's more valuable to the developer. So
it's here that I will recommend that if you haven't already, you should check out 2 previous episodes of this podcast. One is called A Deeper Understanding, and it's got a lot more about affordable housing. Another one's called A Balanced System, and it's technically about water quality, but it's also about how we go about balancing the needs of a community. I think the conversation that I have with this guy Kalamazzo in that episode, it's about how we go about calibrating the machine that we're all components of. And this part of the conversation with Rob ended up being about how that machine moves. And I really do appreciate the beauty of that movement. The way that building codes are a mix of incentives and disincentives. The way that other community and market regulations serve as a counterbalance to the codes, and how the people behind each work together and against each other, and we keep returning to balance after every move, forward or backwards, but somehow always mostly forward. I think about and appreciate the way that so many people believe in that system and opt into it, and in so doing, maintain that gradual forward movement. And when you think about the sort of delicate bureaucratic work that we're describing here that's influenced our spaces on a grand scale over time, and then you think about the way, say, the Trump administration slashes huge chunks of regulations from so many sectors all the time, it's a disruption of that balance. I know it's hard to remember because it was 150 years ago, but an early thing the Trump administration did was remove all of the regulations that the Obama administration had put in place for energy-efficient light bulbs. There's been so much of that for the last 4 years. It's also what motivates Donald Trump's endless riffs about water pressure in bathrooms, and it's very cynical, because it shatters the faith in the system, and the faith that these things work is part of why they work. It's actually the same way with everything. The way that you change, the way that I change, that personal change that has done me so much good over the years, it's also a gradual process that people have to believe in and support. And I try to demonstrate that support and belief in the people that I love, and, apparently, sometimes I don't do a good enough job. When I get down to it, I think that's what's really driving my anxiety about this whole army thing. It's the nagging feeling that I somehow failed as a friend in a way that led to this. That if I'd done a better job reaching out more often, I could have maybe had a say in the whole thing. That belief in the system, in your friends and in your community, it takes work. It's a garden that needs constant tending. And I get so distracted. I chase one idea and then another, and I don't tend to all the gardens. I don't maintain that belief. Again, this episode is about architecture.
Is there a way that, the way we live can make us, smarter and better people?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's been a tremendous number of studies in all areas of architecture that speak to that. I know there's large corporations do this all the time. There's been a lot of studies, market studies about social spaces and work environments and natural light in work environments and the benefits that has in people's psychology and productivity. There's been a lot of studies actually on just natural light and productivity in the workplace. And it's amazing. It's really night and day when you look at the numbers for those things. One of the other big ones is natural light in shopping. People spend, I want to say it's 30% more in stores that have a lot of natural light. And so at one point there was, maybe it was Walmart. There was one chain where they went around the country adding bubble skylights to all of their stores because whatever cost they were spending to retrofit all these big box stores, a lot of cases in which they didn't even own the buildings they were leasing them, it was worth it to them because of the increased sales. So yes, the answer is yes. In almost every category, there are ways to design buildings that improve people's lives just in their day-to-day, but also improve other things like productivity or quality of sleep. Even if you just think about we've all stayed in hotels. One of the things I've noticed in hotels across the country the last couple of years is that people have gotten a lot smarter about how they design walls and floors to be soundproof and selecting the correct doors to be soundproof. And nobody pays any attention to door seals at all. And so whatever soundproofing you've done for your room, you can still hear every single thing that's going on in the corridor, and you're up all night because you're close to the elevator. And so just thinking about how the sound seal it gets done at a hotel door completely changes the quality of sleep that the traveler gets in that room. So all of those things, I think anything you're doing, I think it's how does it impact the goal of the space.
So do you travel with 16 feet of rubber just in case you get put in your hotel?
Earplugs, it's the easier solution.
Yeah, okay, that's true. Yeah, I was thinking about I've got this child-proofing stuff, these
I
rubber
call
strips.
the door supplier, and everywhere I'm going, I'll say, "Okay, I'm going to be here at such and such a time."
My building has every convenience. It's here to make life easy for me. It's gonna be easy to get things done. I will relax along with my loved ones Visit the building, take the highway, park and come up and see me. I'll be working, but if you come visit, I'll put down what I'm doing. My friends are important.
In the history of architecture, has there been thought that's changed, like there has been with science and everything else, where they like...
I mean, I think we already talked about it a little bit just in terms of what people were doing in the 70s. In the 70s, everybody thought, well, we don't want these downtowns. There's too much crime and whatever. We're gonna build these. Everything's about the car. We're gonna have suburban developments, and everybody's gonna have their white picket fence and half an acre and 2.5 kids, and we're all going to drive to the supermarket. And I think between, really post-war, after the 50s, when everybody was trying to sort of reach that, the American dream, the baby boomer generation, that's really where sprawl occurred. And I think at the same time, because of sprawl, one of the things that if you look at urban planning, one of the things that's really important to the vitality of a urban community is, in my opinion, that you need to have a high range of sort of home value in every neighborhood. And the reason is because the people that are more highly educated, that have higher incomes, they typically have louder voices in the community. And the folks that don't have as much education, or maybe are not as educated, do not have equity with that. And if you mix all of those people uniformly throughout a community, then every neighborhood has equal voice and equal opportunity. And I think that drives a lot of success of those different neighborhoods. And then it enables, by having different types of housing. One of the problems they have in Portsmouth right now is we do a lot of work with restaurants. Restaurants right now cannot hire staff. And one of the big reasons is there's no place for them to live. And to try to, get somebody to work a waitstaff job where you're going to drive into town, pay for parking, it's just not, it's crazy. They're going to go get a waitstaff job at some other place, closer to where they live. And so by having that diversity of housing, you one, create equity, but two, you also really create community, and you enable all of the people at every sort of strata of life to coexist, and you enable all of those job positions to exist. Most growth of economy comes from small businesses and startups, about 80%. And so, most of that is not coming from 55 and up communities. Most of that is not coming from gentrified downtowns. And so by creating that mix, you create the cycle where a couple whose kids are out of college, who is reaching retirement age, can move out of their single family house and sell it to someone else who was in an apartment and is looking for a first time home for their growing family. And the person who's retiring can now downsize into the apartment that used to exist for the other person. And you get that sort of cycle of life within a community. And if you don't have that, then you're moving in and out. And so, in the 70s, everybody, it was urban revitalization. Well, we have this part of the downtown that it's lower income, and everybody's moving out to the new suburban development because they want their piece of the American pie. And so the way that we're going to deal with that problem is, instead of trying to change zoning because we believe that sprawl is good, we are instead going to tear down all the houses and build a building in the middle of a parking lot, which is what Parade Mall was in Portsmouth. And what we learned after 20 years of that is that is a really terrible idea for downtowns. And so I think we've kind of come full circle to kind of study why that's a bad idea. The Congress of New Urbanism came out of that in terms of understanding walkability and how far are people willing to walk, and what kind of things do you need for a community within a 5-minute walk, a 10-minute walk, a 15-minute walk to make it a vital, walkable urban community, versus I have to get in my car and go to X. And so depending on what that radius is, it might be a school, it might be a shopping center, it might be a grocery store, it might be a pharmacy. And then understanding you don't need another one of those for another whatever that radius is. And so there's a lot of thought that's gone into that over the last years. Streetscapes have a huge impact on downtowns. Are there trees? Are there nice walkways? Are there benches? Are there plazas in front of buildings? Are there nodes every so often for people to gather? Are there parks? If the answer to that is no, it's not going to be a really nice place to walk, and people aren't going to want to walk there. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot of thought that's gone into that over the last 20 years that I think that have drastically improved zoning plans for downtowns and have improved development of the downtowns. And I think we've seen a generational switch too, where because of sort of the loss of community of the sprawl era and what that's done for people's psychological health, I think there's been, twofold. One, the baby boomers, actually, strangely enough, the ones who sort of dove into sprawl full force, are moving back to downtowns as they retire. They want to downsize. They don't want to. They all lived with their parents, living in suburbia and having to get the stay-at-home nurse or go into a nursing home. They don't want that. They don't want to maintain a big house. They want to get downtown. They want to have resources. They want to walk to things. And what's interesting is we're also seeing the millennial generation wants the same thing. And so that's part of the crunch on downtown housing, is that everybody wants the same space. One of those groups of people has the money to get it. The other one does not. And that's created the challenge that I think we see in terms of workforce housing.
So there's a lot of Grand Designs episodes on YouTube, as it turns out. But they're all weird bootleg quality. And if I'm going to admire a timber frame house, I'm going to do it in high res, or I'm not going to do it at all, okay? But the official Grand Designs YouTube channel has uploaded all of Season 1 from 1999 in as reasonable a quality as can be expected. And it's funny. In those early episodes, Kevin MacLeod is not a contrarian at all. He's supportive and enthusiastic, and he tries to help in real ways. He suggests landscaping or offers solutions to issues with tricky paint jobs. He even picks up a brush and just does it. It reminds me that for good or ill, people always change. Even the ones who seem resistant to it, even the ones who doubt it when they say they've changed, it happens to them too. And when that drives you apart, when that makes someone you love a lot less like you than they used to be, that's okay. We're all changing, we're all moving all the time. We grow apart and grow back together. We make progress, and then we don't, and then we do. The ways in which the Trump administration slashes regulations, the ways in which my friends do things I will never understand, the ways in which I fail my friends and loved ones from time to time, they're all part of it. They're all gears in the machine. They're all part of the system. Because the system is us. That's all it is. Thank you to Rob Harbeson for, again, talking to me about architecture. Thank you for listening. And Jory, I don't know if you'd ever hear this, but I love you. And I'm sorry I wasn't in touch much lately. And please just don't fucking die. And happy birthday.